We are back. Week 8. Week 7 is in the books. What an interesting week it was. We had only 4 players on the DraftKings main slate surpass 30 fantasy points. 2 of those were quarterbacks. And then we had 1 wide receiver and 1 tight end. Looking forward to week 8, we now have what we can consider a full slate of games. We have 13 games on the week 8 slate. No teams are on bye. Thanks for that algorithmically computer-generated schedule that we got this season. No teams on bye, 13 games, no games above 50 point total out of 13 games. But with that, you know the drill. Welcome back to Searching for a Ceiling, presented by 1 Week Season and Sharp Football Analysis. I will be joined here when we come back by the great Rich Hribar. Welcome.
1 Week Season.
There he is, Mr. Rich Hribar. How we doing in week 8?
We're doing good. We did feel a little bit with the no buys. They dropped on us just randomly out of week 8.
Yeah.
But we worked our way through it. We'll have a couple weeks here. It was nice of them at least not to line up the no buys with Halloween week where trick-or-treating is, because I work on Mondays and Tuesdays writing all the games up heavily and into Wednesday. And I need some buys for trick-or-treat because I need to spend a few hours with my kids, during the week to go out trick-or-treating.
Yeah, so we did a lot of our pumpkin patch stuff and pre-holiday festivities this past week, which during the no bye week, which got a little busy as well. So that was interesting. But yes, Mr. Big Dan in the chat. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. And as always, we're going to bring you the heat, searching for some hidden upside here. Subscribe, all those good things. So Rich, we just got through that intro where we have 13 games on the main slate. We have exactly 0 games with a game total of 50 points or more. And that's a completely arbitrary number that we've kind of grown accustomed to over the previous 3 seasons. We know dating back to 2020 season, we had a peak in scoring. Teams were scoring 2.88 touchdowns per game in that season. We were down to 2.43 touchdowns per game last season, and now we are below 2.30, and my dogs are barking in the back. That is great.
They're not happy about the scoring either. They aren't happy.
Outraged. This is an outrage. Scoring is down. So when you talk about going from 2.88 touchdowns per team per game, now down below 2.3, that is over half a touchdown per team per game. That means teams or game environments are scoring on average a full touchdown less than we were seeing through just 3 short years ago. So with all that, the fact that we have these low game totals, the fact that we know teams are playing too high at 60% plus rate across the league, we know that becomes difficult to attack. We talked about how that's influenced some of these quarterbacks, Deshaun Watson last week. How are you seeing this massive 13-game slate from a macro perspective now with these kind of subdued game environments?
Yeah, and this slate's in particular because we don't have a lot of these back and forth matchups either. It's a lot, It's very spread out. We have a lot of big lines again. I mean, the NFL can't set that, or Vegas, can't set these game totals low enough. And we saw last week they opened up a game at 50, Chiefs Chargers, and it immediately got bet under 50 and still went under during the game. And it looked like it had a good first half. Our only saving grace is the Indianapolis Colts this year, and we'll probably talk about them. They play fast, they play bad defense, they have a streaky quarterback, a high variance quarterback. It's they are the one team we count on weekly. I write a game stacks article, and somehow the Colts just find their way in every week because they're the only team that plays in a fun environment. But when you look at it from a macro stance, it is still good if you can get these games right, on a given week. If you are on the right game onslaught, you can pop because not many games are popping over, So if you're a couple weeks ago, Dolphins Panthers, right? If you ran that game correctly and you had Chuba Hubbard and you had Adam Thielen coming back and you had Tua, you had Tyreek Hill, you had Raheem Mostert, you were cooking. You had a leg up on the field. I don't know how a lot of people got to the Browns Colts side in unique ways last week, but that was a game. If you were able to congeal the right pieces there, you're cooking. And so we're going to try to find a few of those spots because that's the way I like to play. I like to play these low field, small entry, single entry stuff. And then I like to try to get these games right and then just let the field try to catch me.
That's an interesting, or it's interesting to me that you brought up that point about overstacks and really leaning into a game environment becomes more viable. Well, if you think about the theoretics behind that, if there are fewer games that have the path to completely erupting, I mean, we look at 3 years ago, there were multiple game environments that were providing 50, 60 points of scoring per week. Now that touchdowns are down, scoring is kind of down around the league. These flash in the pan game environments that erupt seemingly out of nowhere are increasingly important when they do happen. We're not going to see it every single slate. We're not going to see it every week.
Right.
We saw it last week. We saw it in week 3 with the Miami Dolphins hanging a 70 burger on the Denver Broncos. Those are going to happen throughout the season. When they do, they're going to be that much more important as we're searching for ceilings. So that's a great lead into kind of some of the things that we're going to talk to today. Mr. Michael, thank you for joining us for the first time. Let's jump into it, shall we? I'm going to throw it directly over to you. I didn't want to preload you, but I did mention off air that I had 2 very specific questions that I was going to ask you. I'm going to
right.
those, and I want to hear, what is a game environment that you're kind of looking to attack that might not garner much interest for this week?
That might not garner much interest. Is interesting to say, let's say because we've got the Colts out there again, and obviously that's and they have a lot of individual pieces in that game that look good. I will say, I don't know, there's a couple. So I don't know, do you want to start with Jags Steelers?
Let's do it. Especially after that game last week where the Rams just almost inexplicably had their highest rush rate over expectation game with a running back they just signed off the street. So let's talk about that.
2 weeks in a row. It's still an interesting game. Obviously we have, so what I think is interesting about this particular slate is in the previous weeks is that we have groupings of viable plays in the same price zone. Obviously I think that we're going to have a real popular play in Breece Hall, but we also have these subsectors at running back and wide receiver where we got groupings of guys that people want to play. And that creates nice fulcrum points of one, either getting those players right if you only take one player in that same price zone, or if you're getting 2 if you just want to buy players. Because when you have a thing like 2 weeks ago, Raheem Mostert's owned in 60% of leagues at a certain price point, it steers roster building in a linear fashion where we all tend to build similar rosters, right? Even if you have different players, you're still talking about where you allocate salary still gets distributed in an even fashion. Where this week you're going to have to make decisions. At the $77,000 price range, you might want to have Travis Etienne, who's in this game. You might look at Tony Pollard right there. You might look at Alvin Kamara there. We've got this great subsector wide receivers from 5K to 5,500. Zay Flowers, Nico Collins, Terry McLaurin. All these guys are in really good spots. So it's going to make roster building fun this week. We're going to see more diversity, I think, outside of Mr. Breece Hall. And Travis Etienne is one of these guys who I think when people look at that price range of running back, Alvin Kamara is going to be the first guy that kind of jumps out, because especially on DraftKings where he's priced and just the amount of receiving work he's doing, how it just leans into the site and how it's scored, it gives him a boost. So Travis Etienne, if he comes in overlooked, I mean, we've got a player that I'm literally searching for ceiling, and we've brought him up as leverage and multiple times throughout this year. And he's just delivered for us when he's under-owned repeatedly. And he just needed to check that last box where he was getting goal line touches. And he's now gotten those 2 weeks in a row. He leads the NFL in touches. All his receiving work is up. And he's facing a team that you just let in and talked about that just allowed those 2 guys that were brought in. Royce Freeman was on the team, but they just allowed 127 rushing yards to Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman. So Travis Etienne is a guy that immediately jumps out of to me as one of these guys that gives us exactly what we're looking for as far as leverage versus a popular play, is in a game that might be being overlooked, and is in a price zone to where he might be overlooked.
Yeah, and I love that call too, or that shout too, because when we look at how the Jags have really handled their offense over the previous 2 seasons, they have been a lot more at risk or susceptible to the game environment that they're playing in. What I mean by that is we think of this team as a team that is just going to go out there and kind of open up their offense and pass a ton. But if you look at Trevor Lawrence's game logs and dating back to last season under this current coaching regime, they're much more muted than I think the perception is around the field. they are not really going out and looking to throw 36 plus times every single day. They are really, really kind of letting the game come to them and adjusting from there. And that kind of plays into the now more robust role that Travis Etienne has, particularly against a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, that are their defensive line and their pass rush, and then kind of not a lot behind that as far as defensive prowess goes. So is this team going to game plan to drop back a ton against an opponent that can really be beaten deep? They can be beaten on the ground, and they can kind of be picked apart if they're going to be, if the Jags are really going to be looking to adopt more of a control the game kind of mindset. What I'm trying to get at here is Travis Etienne brings multiple paths to success beyond just being this heavy workload type running back. He's involved in the pass game. We've seen now the goal line stuff. We've seen the increased red zone usage. So yeah, I love that shout. Particularly everybody, like you mentioned, is going to be flocking to one Alvin Kamara here, who has 2 games of 14 targets through his past 4 games. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Love that shout. Any other interesting pieces you got from this game in particular?
Yeah, so he who shall not be named, we will name, just because I think it's a unique dynamic in this game, Mr. Calvin Ridley. Yep. It looks like we are trending towards, and it's Friday, so like keep your eye on the injury stuff, but it looks like we are trending towards Zay Jones returning this weekend, which, adds another piece. Obviously the guys that they've been playing in place of Zay Jones in this offense, the Tim Joneses, the Jamal Agnews, like, these are not really viable players that earned opportunities in this offense. They have a role for Zay Jones, vertical and in the red zone. And since he's been gone, Mr. Calvin Ridley has now 56% of his targets are further than 10 yards downfield, and 60.4% of his targets are outside the numbers. So he's getting targets at a very low success rate. That come inherently with a low success rate. The return of Zay Jones may open some opportunity for him that we don't really know, because Zay Jones has missed 4 games outright. He left another game early. We only saw him really, this like trio of wide receivers play in unison week 1 and week 2. And they left a lot of points on the field in week 2 against the Chiefs. A lot of touchdowns were left on the field in that game. But the Steelers have particularly struggled on the outside. Like, they have really struggled to limit outside wide receiver production. They're 27th in points per game allowed to boundary receivers. Touchdown rate 23rd, 9.2 yards per target is 25th. So if Zay Jones comes back and takes away some of that, the lower success rate stuff, and allows Calvin Ridley to have maybe some more opportunities that come with a higher success rate, it could open up some things for him. I think he becomes interesting on the slate because his price has finally dropped too. So he's an interesting guy, I think. And then the Steelers side, I think, is interesting because the Jags have been kind of a pass funnel. They're really good against the run. And we really only have this 2-pronged target tree with Pittsburgh because their tight end position is so limited with Pat Freiermuth being out. Both Connor Hayward and Darnell Washington are just kind of blocking guys. They don't really throw to their running backs a ton. Only a negative game script does Jalen Warren see a lot of work. Najee doesn't see a lot of work in the inherent flow of the offense. So we really only have like this short target tree of George Pickens and Deontay Johnson to kind of run this back. So we have a lot of mini stack opportunities. We have a way to congeal this together if you don't want to play the quarterbacks. So there are a lot of opportunities here that I think are intriguing in this game.
Yep. Note from the listener, I went and double checked on this, and 22 minutes ago. So
22 minutes. Missed it by 22 minutes.
Yeah. Right before we jumped on the show, we were in here talking. They hit us with the Zay Jones ruled out.
So there you go, man. So so you're probably going to get Calvin Ridley with a lot more of those, like that forced opportunity to win outside. And to win vertical. Not that the matchup still like opens up an opportunity for that, but like that's the role we're probably going to see him in, a similar role that what he's had with Zay Jones out.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of talk also about Calvin Ridley's production with Zay Jones in and out. And while the role has changed a little bit, the route tree has remained rather consistent. So I don't buy into, I think that's a small sample size alert. Zay Jones has only played 2 games. Yeah. There is the potential for a guy like Calvin Ridley to bring some elite ceiling here. I'm going to steer the conversation now to another game where I think is going to be largely played incorrectly by the field, and that's this Vikings and Green Bay Packers game. When you look at how both of these offenses want to move the ball, it kind of aligns with the shortcomings of the defense on the other side. The big uncertainty that is present in this game are Brian Flores is insane 57% blitz rate. And you look at Jordan Love's stats when he is blitzed versus when he is not blitzed, pressured when he is not pressured. It's not pretty. That said, we kind of talked about this team last week, this Packers team. They're hopefully getting healthier. We mentioned last week that it would be the first week with a healthy Aaron Jones and a healthy Christian Watson, and then Aaron Jones only played 35% of the offensive snaps. But this team having, or beyond their bye, being embarrassed now for multiple weeks in a row, not doing much against this Denver Broncos historically bad defense. Are you seeing any upside from the Packers? And is that going to basically, via game environment, shift some upside to the Vikings as well?
Well, they stopped pushing the ball vertically. Early in the season, the Packers were taking a lot of downfield shots. The first 6 weeks of the season, Jordan Love was averaging 9.9 air yards per attempt. That was the furthest depth of target in the NFL. And that's just completely shrunk the past 2 weeks. They're not pushing the ball downfield. And you think that would like them getting Christian Watson back would be like, all right, let's keep pushing. Let's keep going. But the coaching staff's really tried to rein Jordan Love in because of some of the mistakes he had early in the season. And it's really kind of slowed this offense down. I mean, this offense is not pushing the ball downfield. They're playing slow, and they're not scoring any points until they're pressed to score points. They have 24 points now in the first half. So it's really kind of put them behind the 8 ball. The game plan, it's one of these things. Is it a Jordan Love problem? Is it a LaFleur problem because it's a Jordan Love problem? It's like, it's hard to diagnose because we're not in the building to kind of say like, well, what's forced this change? I tend to believe it's a Jordan Love problem because Jordan Love was a prospect I wasn't high on. He's a mistake-prone quarterback. He's never been accurate at any level. And I think that the Packers now are finally just like sinking instead of swimming with him. So it'll be interesting to see how it moves forward. The Vikings do not give up a lot of vertical passing because they play a ton of. They're not the opposite of Wink Martindale, because Wink's going to blitz and play a lot of man coverage behind it. Brian Flores is blitz heavy, but he's going to play a ton of zone behind it. Not give up. He's still giving you a lot of umbrella coverage, a lot of quarters, so stuff like that behind these blitzes. So is this quick passing game something we believe in with the Packers, right? That's what we have to have faith in. And it's really tough for me to kind of have faith in Jordan Love because he's just not an accurate quarterback.
Yeah. One thing to keep an eye on, Luke Musgrave has not practiced as of yesterday. We're waiting on the practice report from Friday with that ankle injury. Guys like Josiah DeGuara and Tucker Kraft are not your prototypical go run 8 yards downfield over the middle of the field and catch a pass. They're more in line. They're more blocking type stuff that could open up some interesting over the middle of the field type work. I don't know if Christian Watson is really necessarily going to be utilized in that role. Romeo Doubs kind of similarly, but also we've got some injury concerns kind of going on with some of these wide receivers too. So there could be something. There could be, if Aaron Jones is finally healthy, some of these rub and sneak out into the second level behind the linebackers type stuff. I'm just intrigued by how these offenses in their recent form kind of lines up with what we expect from these defenses. And a lot of that comes down to, is LaFleur going to adjust the game plan enough coming in? Because he has very clearly been one of the poorest game planners with this team scoring, as you mentioned, only 24 first half points through 6 games played. So very clearly there's something going on that is not meshing with this team. At some point, they still have talented skill position players. So at some point, I would expect them to right that ship. But as you mentioned, it might be a Jordan Love problem. As a Packers fan, I'm sitting here saying, hey, this is a LaFleur problem, because we have seen this offense struggle so mightily to start games. And when you talk about the level of struggles they've had in the first half, that to me is something is wrong with the game plan coming in, because there's really those 3 areas of a game. There's the first half, the first quarter plus, which is, this is our game plan. Then you get punched in the mouth and you have to adjust, and you're now game managing. And then it's like fourth quarter is a whole nother animal completely. So the fact that they've struggled in that game planning, portion of their season from a week-to-week perspective is troubling for me as a Packers fan. I got to admit that I'm a Packers fan, as I like completely rip on LaFleur. But yeah, it's interesting to me.
The first
nonetheless.
3 possessions of games, Warren wrote about the Packers on the site this week. First 3 possessions of the game, they're number 29 in rate of drives that score points, number 31 in the rate of drives that result in punts, number 29 in drive distance, yards gained per drive, number 27 in points per drive. And the first 3 drives of the game, like these are your scripted, how you want to come out and attack a defense, and not good.
Hashtag not good, Bob. We move on. I had to get them out because I thought they were interesting. So now I want to get to...
I will say this, though, about that game, too, on the other side, too. Like, we had this eruption game from Jordan Addison on Monday night. Yeah. Obviously, everyone knows pricing for Monday night players is already out. So the Packers actually are really good against, opposing lead receivers, opposing boundary receivers. They struggle against interior slot guys. So if we get some point chasing here for Jordan Addison, it could be a spot that definitely come under on him.
And the Packers are extremely banged up in the secondary. We have Eric Stokes and I forgot his name. The other guy in the secondary who had hit the injured reserve this week. We have Jair Alexander, who was not practicing early in the week. So extremely banged up in the secondary as well. Worth mention there. So now I want to transition the discussion to the first of my 2 questions, and it's going to lead us to none other than Sean McVay's Los Angeles Rams. We have a Rams team who has very clear paths of moving the football against man coverage, against Dallas Cowboys team who's playing the 3rd highest rate of man coverage in the league. We know that they are, even with all the talent on, their first and second levels up to their linebacking core, even with all that talent, they are generating pressure at a rate below their blitz rate, which is something we typically don't see out of these elite type defenses. So I ask you this. Is what we've seen out of the Dallas Cowboys defense this year a function of them being really, really good on defense? Or is it a function of them playing the Giants, the Jets, the Cardinals, all these teams who are in the bottom 10 in scoring this year?
Yeah, I'm probably a little bit of both because they do have a multi-year sample of being, a good defense. We know there's a lot of talent, especially when you have Micah Parsons. But we have seen teams that have functional offenses in the 49ers and the Chargers. Chargers only scored 17 points, but statistically, we're able to move the football in that game. So there is some opportunity here. What you do worry about, though, is that pass rush if it does get home, because Matthew Stafford, as he's progressed, at this stage of his career, is literally one of the most sensitive quarterbacks to pressure. And we saw it again last week against the Steelers when he was the worst quarterback below completion rate expectation. When he's been pressured this season, he's only completing 39.2% of his passes. That's 29th in the league. He's 58.8 rating, is 23rd in the league. So if the Cowboys do get home, that's where the disruption starts. This should be a game where we see them have to be more passing viable than they have the past 2 weeks. Being road dogs of almost a touchdown. We should have to see them throw the football more and not be as condensed as they were in the run game the past 2 weeks. So that's good because they're only throwing the ball to 2 guys. Since Cooper Kupp has come back, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua have now combined for 68%, 76%, and 70% of the team's targets over 3 games. Like, that is a ludicrous condensed target tree. So we do know where the ball's going. So if you are running these Cowboy stacks, the other element here too in play too is you got the Cowboys as home favorites. And prior to the bye, when the Cowboys played the Chargers, it was the first time the entire season they ran a play in the second half of a game with the game within 7 points of either direction. So that's wild. We've only seen the Cowboys play in one neutral game script too. So if we don't get a neutral game script Cowboy game, like that's where we've seen the failure for a lot of these Cowboys over the opening month of the season was they literally just didn't play a normal football game in either direction in the opening month of the season. So if they do get out ahead and get out and race ahead to points, does it cap a guy like Tony Pollard? Does it cap a CeeDee Lamb? Hell, even Michael Gallup had 10 targets last game. So it's an interesting dynamic.
There's a lot of interesting dynamics when you start zooming into the micro aspects of this game. I mean, we have CeeDee Lamb who's seeing like a 22% targets per route run rate this year, far below what he has put up in the past. We have a Dallas Cowboys offense who is averaging just over 31 pass attempts per game. We have Tony Pollard who is seeing less utilization off tackle. He is seeing less schemed usage to get him the ball in space. we've seen his efficiency metrics basically be cut in half when you look at last season. His explosive run rate is down from about 8.8% to now 4.2%. All these metrics are indicating that like they are not utilizing these highly talented pieces in Dallas to their maximum and trying to maximize the talent that they have. The other side of that is
they're generating no explosive plays.
zero. And Puka Nacua on the other side of this discussion had not demonstrated a consistent ability to beat man coverage. We saw his targets per route run rate drop from 34% heading into last week to 17% against man coverage. And then he went out and against the Steelers team that played man coverage at above average rate, he went out and went ham when extra additional attention was put towards Cooper Kupp. So all of that introduces a really, really wide range of outcomes with this game environment in particular. We know that these are two slow offenses. We know that they combine to allow well below average offensive plays run from scrimmage per game. We know that the Cowboys are going to run the football so they can rest their defense, all that nonsense. We know all that. But I think what's going to go largely missed here is there are some explosive pieces in this game. And all of that discussion we just had just points to a wide range of outcomes. So I'm interested. I have not looked at ownership yet, but I'm interested in this spot. What do you make of kind of the uncertainty in this one?
Yeah, I mean, this is a game that I look for, like I said, in those, small single entry stuff, like where you're just hoping to get the game right, and then it's a game where you can stack good pieces around it. If you're right, so like if you're running like a Tony Pollard, you probably can't do a double Rams bring back just because you're allocating so much salary, but you get you get your Rams piece right. Maybe you have a guy like Michael Gallup or Jake Ferguson in this game. Rams have really struggled against tight ends, and he's still getting like his red zone work is still phenomenal.
Yeah.
And he hasn't had the targets. My buddy John Daigle tried to explain. He's like, I can't tell if Jake Ferguson is about to break out or he's just underachieving. It's like hard to diagnose, but he did before the bye run a route on 84% of team dropbacks. His routes per dropback have gone up in each of the past 4 games from the week prior. So is he a guy that you bring back as a small piece and you kind of try to just get like all the touchdowns right in this game, and then you're kind of on pace there? But that's where I'm intrigued from it, is like small entry, single entry, small field stuff is where I'm looking to like stack this game.
Yeah, you look at a guy like Jake Ferguson who has like a 4.4 ADOT, but he's got like a 30% red zone target rate.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite the profile, to be honest. Very, very interesting. So I'll throw it over to you again. We'll examine another potential spot for some hidden upside here, and then I'll get to kind of that my second big question for you. So I'll throw it over to you. What's another spot that you're kind of circling in pencil of interest to attack here?
I'll do a player one instead of a game environment.
Okay, yeah, that works for sure.
Yeah, I want to talk about Garrett Wilson for sure, because Garrett Wilson is always, his price never really drops, right? So like never really anyone feels like they obligated to click on the button for Garrett Wilson. Even when he faced the Broncos a couple weeks ago, right? Like, and people were kind of steaming him, it was just like, he's priced around these guys. Like, I'm just going to take the safety, right? But now we have this great like leverage point too, where his teammate's going to be literally the most popular player on the slate. We talked about Alvin Kamara being really popular, but Breece Hall on both sites, where he's 7,200 on FanDuel, he's 5,900 on DraftKings. Literally has the only good running back game against the Eagles prior to the bye. He ran a season high, route participation rate. Like, there's all these things. Like, Breece Hall is going to be super popular this week. So we have the leverage point of potentially, like, if Garrett Wilson does well, then he can steal touchdowns here. But this in particular matchup for Garrett Wilson, I think, offers some really intriguing signal. We always talk about, Wink sending the blitz like we do Brian Flores, plays a lot of man coverage behind it. When Zach Wilson has been blitzed this season, Garrett Wilson has 60.5% of the team targets. I said 60. Not 25, not 30, like where you hear about these targets. He has 73% of the team air yards when Zach Wilson is blitzed. The problem is, we got to deal with the inaccurate target rate. 26.9% of his targets have been inaccurate on those plays. But when Zach Wilson is blitzed and not pressured, Garrett Wilson has caught 11 of 16 targets, 180 yards and a touchdown. Only A.J. Brown has more receiving yards this season when his quarterback is blitzed and not pressured. So we've got like this great kind of like point here where he's leveraged against probably the most popular player on the slate. He's got a matchup. He's priced in a range where like people won't get to him. He's going to definitely be a guy that I'm probably going to have overexposure to in this matchup.
Yeah, that's a great shout. I love those. That threw me for a loop. I'm very in tune with the numbers and the analytics, and that one threw me for a loop. I had not seen that.
Yeah.
That's outrageous.
61% target rate.
That's outrageous. Outrageous fun. That's very interesting too for where he's priced. When we're looking at, and I'm not going to know for certain, and I never know for certain, but a lot of what I do in the game theoretic realm is looking at how the pieces fit together in the puzzle that is that slate. And so I really don't get a full feel for that until tonight into Saturday morning. But he seems like that price range, the sub 7K, but higher than like 5,500, that price range, right, where Garrett Wilson is resting, is probably going to go rather underutilized this week. And on a full 13 game slate, there's a lot of stuff that we got to work through. But ownership, like individual ownership, matters a little bit less when you start getting below mega chalk. Like Breece Hall is probably going to be mega chalk. So when I'm thinking about like, how do I
don't think we're going to have a mega chalk wide receiver this week.
No, I don't think so either. And a lot of that is how the salary kind of shakes out. I mean, you look at wide receiver, and up at the top, we've got some like Tyreek Hill, who's questionable. He did get in a limited practice yesterday, waiting on that practice report today. But we've got Cooper Kupp, Jamar Chase, AJ Brown, who we'll talk about here shortly. That is going to be my second big question for you. So a little bit of a sneak peek. Puka Nacua, we have CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Waddle, Brandon Ayuk with no Deebo Samuel. There's a lot of guys that are priced at wide receiver above 7K. But the way that pricing shakes out, it's likely going to lead the field to have to choose one of those guys. And so that's going to leave, I think, this middle tier of player pricing at wide receiver largely not untouched, but relatively speaking, untouched, right? All right. That's an interesting discussion.
Yeah, and if people are paying in that range, they're probably going to get to Thielen just because he's been so steady. Like people, like, hey, this guy's been winning me money every week. It's easy click for me. Like he's, it's just the mentality of gamers,
Yeah. So with all that, I teased it there for a minute. I want to talk about this Philadelphia Eagles pass defense, in particular this matchup with a Washington Commanders team that just seems to, out of nowhere, play this team more difficult than they otherwise should when just looking at how their team is comprised and the composition and the makeup and the underlying metrics. This Washington Commanders team should not be hanging with these Eagles, but they continue to do so. What was interesting to me when I was digging up this spot is A.J. Brown and how he has really taken over the primary focal point in this offense against man coverage. You look at his splits man to zone, his targets per route run rate against man coverage, almost 40%. He's about 38% targets per route run against man coverage. Against zone, it's a little bit more evenly spread between Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert. So I ask you this. We know the last time that these two teams played, the Washington Commanders ran almost exclusively from nickel. And that makes sense when you consider a matchup against a mobile quarterback who is averaging over 10 carries per game. It makes sense that they're going to be running primarily from nickel. That left first round rookie Emmanuel Forbes in a select handful of one-on-one snaps with A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown absolutely cooked him for both of his scores that game. He had 170 yards receiving total. So I ask you this, do you expect a similar nickel-heavy cover 3 type game plan from the Washington Commanders, or do you think that we're going to see them utilize heavier rates of man coverage? Because I think that's really intriguing and important for one A.J. Brown.
Well, I mean, yeah, basically ended Emmanuel Forbes' early career.
Right? Poor guy.
He came out the following Thursday and blew an assignment to DJ Moore, and they benched him. He's played 5 snaps since. He didn't play at all in week 6, and he played 5 snaps last week. So Emmanuel Forbes probably isn't going to be out there. To me, yeah, I think when you look at the way the Commanders, and it's been consistent even with Manuel Forbes out, like we saw last week, Jalen Hyatt hit them for 2 vertical balls. Like they have really, in the week before, Drake London, even with Manuel Forbes out, went for 9 for 125 against them. Like they've really struggled on the boundaries, outside and vertical. To me, the most intriguing piece in this game, obviously, listen, we can get to AJ Brown. The dude's on an absolute demon run. Right now, 127 or more yards. People short him the 2 yards because 125 is the round number. He's got 127 or more in every game.
Let's not compare him to Megatron, dude. He's doing his own thing here.
But Devontae Smith has had one good game the past month, and it also was against these Commanders. 9 targets in that game. He had 7 for 78, which obviously didn't blow up and have an eruption spot. But listen, he's out there every snap. He's been on the field for 99.6% of the team dropbacks this year. He's playing still 75% of his routes outside. So like, man, I know that he's not an easy click where he's priced, but like if you're running Hurts doubles, which you could, because Hurts is probably going to run less this game, coming with that knee injury, playing with the brace, he'll probably have less designed rushing. Listen, you don't need to be mobile to run the brotherly shove or tush push, whatever your moniker of choice is.
Brotherly
but
shove. He's
probably going to run actually less. And you don't need to really run against these Commanders. If you're a quarterback, you can just throw all over them. So to me, Devontae Smith is probably the most intriguing because we know he's capable of sealing weeks too. So like he's a guy that I'm literally glommed onto. And you have your inherent bring back in this game because Terry McLaurin is still super cheap and he's getting over 25% of team targets the past month. He is also one of these guys when you say these guys shouldn't be that good against the Eagles. Like McLaurin's a guy that just consistently has good game logs against the Eagles. Where even last year when Darius Slay was in his bag, McLaurin still got him both games. So he plays well in this matchup.
What really tripped me up when looking at this game environment, when writing up this game, is how unconcentrated the Washington Commanders offense has been. You look at their targets per route run rates, you look at their overall team target market shares, you look at their snap rates, you look at the rotational factors of this offense. And it kind of begins to make a little bit of sense when you look at who their new offensive coordinator is and Eric Bieniemy, kind of bringing those more rotational. I mean, they're playing guys like De'Ami Brown. They're playing obviously Jahan Dotson and Terry McLaurin are not seeing necessarily high snap rates, but they're still in a route at 100% of the time. So 100% called pass plays, they're in a route. That doesn't necessarily negate them not being on the field. I mean, they're on the field at like 86 to 88% of the snap rates. So they're not playing every offensive snap, but they're in a route at a high rate. You also have Curtis Samuel, who's kind of that schemed, gadgety guy. You have Logan Thomas, who has 1 game of double-digit looks. Terry McLaurin has 2 games of double-digit targets this year. Logan Thomas has 1. No other pass catcher has a game of double-digit targets. And while that does not mean that these guys cannot hit for a ceiling game, because Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson's red zone target share is off the charts. Terry McLaurin is very clearly the top pass catcher here, but that kind of just influences floor. So to me, these guys are less single entry, small field, 3 max stuff type players because I think we can get similar upside with higher floors in other spots. But for my MME crew in the crowd, very, very interesting because these are guys that can do significant damage on sub double digit kind of target stuff. So that was very interesting to me. That. Yeah, this is just an interesting spot. I don't know how else to describe it because we could see this game played to a 60 combined point overtime victory like we saw the first meeting. We could also see a divisional kind of slugfest here. So do you have any other things to pull out from this spot?
No, I mean, it's good. I mean, the Eagles have been kind of a pass funnel. They're just extremely so good against the run. And we've seen that the Commanders have just struggled to run the football this past month. We've even seen them start to actually reduce Brian Robinson's role in the early down stuff. We've seen Chris Rodriguez now the past 2 weeks mix his way in as they try to explore kind of different avenues of trying to run the football effectively. So it should be another high drop back game. Eagles D is really expensive. Like, we never talk about defenses and but
Oh
man,
my God.
if you can pay for Eagles D, like, Jesus, man, that's a way to get unique for sure. Highest price D. Cause Sam Howell is
40 sacks.
It's 40 sacks.
40
Absolutely
sacks.
unreal, man.
That's insane, dude. All right. With that game behind us, now I want to transition back to a little bit more macro perspective. And we know that the league is shifting to too high base. We know why that is, or we've talked about that in the past. If you're new and you haven't seen those discussions, go check out earlier episodes. But there's really 4, maybe 5 head coaches or offensive play callers that are really looking to exploit too high. There's Bobby Slowick in Houston. There is Sean McVay with the Rams. There is Mike McDaniel with Miami. And there's Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco. And why are all those guys? Why is it interesting that those are kind of the guys that are looking to actively exploit too high? They're all of the Gary Kubiak / Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. So all these guys are familiar with each other. And it's funny to me that we see pressers where all of them are talking about, oh yeah, I stole that from Bobby Slowick out in Houston. Oh yeah, I stole that from Mike McDaniel. We're starting to see the rules be bent when we look at, we're used to seeing that from Bill Belichick, him wasting time on defense via bending the rules. We're starting to see that with Mike McDaniel and this entire kind of past Gary Kubiak coaching tree. We're seeing things like Tyreek Hill in horizontal motion at the snap of the football. Obviously, you cannot have a guy in motion moving forward at snap, but they're bending those rules because now you have a guy like Tyreek Hill or Deebo Samuel or Tutu Atwell or Nico Collins who are at a full sprint at the snap of the football. Yes, they're running horizontal and they're running these weird loopy Schwuppenhausen routes that don't even fall into a standard route tree. But you're getting a guy like Tyreek Hill, who's running full speed at the snap of the football. That's very, very interesting as we kind of look at the offenses that are finding success this year as well. Patrick Mahomes' Chiefs are going to have success. We talked about the former Gary Kubiak coaching tree. Outside of those 4 teams and outside of the Kansas City Chiefs, who will lump in that same discussion at 5th, are there any offenses who you're excited to see moving forward, particularly on this slate where there's a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity?
Well, I don't know about from a full season long stance. I mean, there's definitely offenses I think set up to succeed this week. Obviously you brought up the Texans, they're a team that's in a really good spot here because they're a team that also can't run the football, and we even saw before the bye them start to mess with Dameon Pierce's snap stuff. Devin Singletary was basically involved in a 50-50 split. But this is given their offensive line. I don't even think in this matchup where people try to talk themselves maybe into the Panthers, who are getting 2 linebackers back too this week, that you can even get to Dameon Pierce, right? It's just a hard sell.
Oh, yeah.
But you can sell yourself on either CJ Stroud, and you look at his stuff without pressure is just phenomenal. Carolina's not getting any pressure on the quarterback, but you've got these 2 guys, these outside wide receivers in Nico Collins and Tank Dell, with no Robert Woods now available this week, that have shown us spike weeks, big spike weeks. We obviously have the Tank Dell Jaguars game. Nico's given us 2, one against the Colts, once against the Steelers. He's only behind AJ Brown, Brandon Ayuk, and Tyreek Hill in yards per route run. Carolina, no JC Horn still. It's not going to be back still for the next couple weeks. They're just getting flooded by these outside wide receivers. So we've got this really good spot to where even if you don't get the Stroud, I mean, you've got Nico Collins in that we talked about that price zone, right? You talked about him directly versus Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin would be more of your cash game guy, like you said, right? You're going to get your 8 to 10 targets. Is the ceiling there? Well, Nico Collins, you give him double-digit targets. We've already seen it, right? He can get you 30 points. Tank Dell is capable of having a 30-point game. Guys in that price zone. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about trying to play these guys for actual ceiling, and depending on where you're playing your games at in your game selection.
Yeah. So Yeah, you saw me highlight him on the screen. Where I was thinking, or where my own to answer my own question, where I immediately went to is a team like Baltimore Ravens with the new offensive coordinator. We have a lot of moving pieces, but when you look at kind of like what this team is and how they're trying to win games, there's still an offense that is bottom 3 in the league in pass attempts per game. They're still playing slow. Yes, like their pass rate over expectation is inching up as the season is progressing. But this is largely a team that kind of has to be pushed as far as offensive or aerial volume, we'll say. So against the Arizona Cardinals, which could be Joshua Dobbs' last start this season, with Kyler Murray looking likely to return next week, do you think the Arizona Cardinals have enough juice to really push the Ravens here? Is there upside there in this spot?
Not for the Cardinals. I mean, this offense has died the last month. Josh Dobbs is the most inaccurate quarterback the past month, lowest completion rate below expectation. Great story for opening season. Listen, I hope Josh Dobbs is made himself money moving forward as a backup, right? Like, hang around the league, make some spot starts. He's mobile, but like this offense has died. And the defense has become who we thought they were. As well. We just become like a weekly target for us. They don't pressure the quarterback. They don't try to play man coverage. They don't do anything. They're just completely passive. They really don't. Like, that's Jonathan Gannon's MO too. I know it's like the style like of defense. It's very passive. He wants you to throw short and then to make tackles, but like they can't stop the run. They really just don't have the personnel. And it's really kind of been exposed since that Dallas game. And they've been absolutely just crushed. I mean, if Seattle doesn't have the multiple turnovers last week and kind of shoot themselves in the foot with that red zone turnover, like they probably win by 17 plus in that game. They haven't been within 10 points since the Cowboys game of any opponent. But it might not matter because the Ravens completely flooded the Lions and kind of kept their foot on the gas. I mean, Lamar threw for 360 in a game they won by 32 points. Yeah. So there's definitely opportunity. What's hurt the Ravens, I think, structurally of what they've set out to do, because in the preseason they showed us they wanted to be an 11-base personnel team and do a lot of these things. But like their guys just haven't been healthy. Like Odell and Bateman just haven't been able to really get on the field, and the rotation of guys behind them just aren't good enough. The Nelson Aguilars aren't good enough. The Devin Duvernays. We lived that life last year. Yeah. So like that, I think that's held Monken back a little bit for what he wants to do. And early in the season, they kind of showed that they didn't want to use Lamar and like the designed run game as much. And then they've kind of been forced to, and it's actually made them a better offense for it. Listen, you incorporate some naked boot action for me. You're speaking my language. The naked boot is my swan song for the just run it, baby. Just run it. And so him getting that touchdown.
Easy over there. You're getting all hot and bothered.
No, people don't use the naked boot often enough. You could look up some great Peyton Manning naked boots. Where like no one believes it. There's a Steve Bono 77-yard naked boot touchdown run where just the cameraman doesn't even know he has the ball. But they used it on the goal line with Lamar.
The goal line, they did that with Peyton as well.
Yeah, you get the Lamar Jackson touchdown. But it's hard for this game from like a game environment stance. It's hard because like Hollywood Brown has been just getting nuked. Like we talked a few weeks ago about Hollywood Brown. Like, man, he's just getting he looks like a value at this volume. But I mean, over the past 4 weeks, only Amari Cooper has a higher rate of inaccurate targets than Hollywood Brown does. Like we just need more actionable targets. Like they're very loose targets. I mean, people are going to get to probably bad chalk Trey McBride this week. And I won't yuck anyone's yum on a $2,800 and a $4,900 tight end. Like do what you got to do at tight end. I hear you.
Judgment-free zone, man.
Yeah. I mean, he's going to be on the field a lot. The matchup's crap. His quarterback's not playing well. At least you can say Arizona's throwing a bunch of targets to tight ends. Like you just throw it, let Jesus take the wheel. I get it. But I mean, there's just nobody like Amari DiMercato. Like I can't get to these guys this week.
Yeah. So is this a situation where you'd be willing to pull a Lamar Jackson double or a Lamar Jackson skinny with no bringbacks, just try and capture another 40-pointer out of these guys?
Yeah, Lamar is at a great spot. The only quarterback that hasn't scored more fantasy points against Arizona than what they were averaging entering the game was Matthew Stafford. And they just ran the ball the entire second half of that game. Maybe that happens here. I mean, it'd be easy to try to talk yourself into a guy like Gus Edwards, but like from like a fantasy stance from a DFS side, like what does the Gus Edwards game getting there have to look like? He had an 80-yard catch last week.
Yeah.
That ain't happening again. Like, he's got to score multiple touchdowns easily, right, at his price.
Mhm.
And like, that's tough to chase.
Yep, I will. I'll back that up as well. All right, man. That was a fun episode, but we got about 5 minutes before we'll get out of here. So give me. Let's play a game. How about that? Let's play a game. I'll give you. I'll give you a. Let's do this. I'll give you two options of offenses, and you tell me one that you would be interested in over the other. And it's not going to be fun and it's not going to be easy, but we're going to do this. Check this out.
Sure, man.
All right. The New Orleans Saints and anybody not named Alvin Kamara,
Yep.
or the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, I mean, I have one of my favorite plays on this slate is Chris Olave, so I guess I'll
There
take
it
this.
is. I was looking for. I was fishing.
Yeah, I hear you, man. Yeah, I mean, not only is it the same situation we talked about Garrett Wilson, where it's direct leverage on a player in his own offense that's going to be highly owned, but he has at least 6 catches in 5 to 7 games this year. We talk about Gus Bradley all the time. The Gus bus loves to run that cover 3. He's running at 56.6% of opposing passing plays, by far the highest in the league. He's one of these guys we can count on defensively from a defensive scheme stance, because he doesn't change what he does versus any opponent. Like, some of this stuff, it's hard to get in the weeds on, of like how this guy performs against a specific coverage, because it oscillates week to week. For game plans, but like the Colts, given their young secondary and what Gus Bradley does, he's just consistent. He's going to play a lot of cover 3 every week. Against cover 3 this season, Chris Olave leads the Saints with 29% of the team targets, 41% of team air yards. He's been targeted on 29.3% of his routes. What I like about this the most, though, is that only 10.3% of Olave's targets against cover 3 have been deemed inaccurate, as opposed to 20.5% against everywhere else. When Derek Carr's getting that single high stuff, he's hitting Chris Olave on accurate targetry. But he's getting a lot against these, like the cover 4 stuff and like the other stuff. Like, he's getting these targets that come with lower success rates, and it showed up. Like I said, his inaccurate target rate is cut in half, literally cut in half against these looks. So that's what I like about it the most, is we're getting more effective targets too from Chris Olave in these situations. So yeah, Chris Olave is a guy I can definitely tell you right now is a guy I will be heavily invested in player prop stuff and going over the field on.
Yeah. It is also interesting. You mentioned that Chris Olave is around a 29% targets per route run rate against cover 3. Alvin Kamara is actually at 37.1% targets per route run against cover 3. Small sample. I mean, but most of his like blow up 14 target games were actually against a soft shell cover 3. So I'm trying to work through, like, do I just eat that? Is that okay? Chalk to eat?
On DraftKings, I think FanDuel, I think you can come under on Kamara, because you have the touchdown equity stuff. You have a lot of outs, a lot more outs on FanDuel than you do on DraftKings.
I'd buy that. I'd buy that. All right, we'll continue this game because that was fun. The New York Football Giants, with now Daniel Jones was ruled as out again heading into this week with his neck injury, or the Seattle Seahawks against Cleveland.
Yeah, that one's tough. I want to do, because the Browns are in a similar spot again, or the Seahawks are in a similar spot, like it's the Browns that we saw at the Colts. Like, you've got these great man beaters, right? Like DK Metcalf for his career has historically been great against man coverage. Yeah. But even this year, he's only averaging 1.19 yards per hour against man. This is another team that is playing really slow. I was looking into some of Geno's peripherals, because Geno is a guy I was kind of into at his draft cost, especially we talked about the best ball portfolio before the show, especially where he was going in these best ball leagues, because he had thrown all the multiple touchdown passing games last year. He was getting drafted like QB 15. He was like an easy click for me there. And the production just hasn't been there, but he's actually, all his peripheral stats are the exact same, like almost the exact same. What's happened though, is the touchdown rate is dipped because they're throwing the ball, running the ball more in the red zone, and they're just running the ball more in general through game script. And I don't know if it's a byproduct of the offensive line injuries they've had at the start of the season, but Geno, like from a peripheral stance, all his rate stats are exactly the same. And he's even number 1 again in completion rate over expectation. His yards per pass attempt the exact same. And it's just like, man, where's the disconnect though? Why aren't these receivers like, why aren't we getting any production out of these guys? Because even Tyler Lockett, he's been a top 40 scorer in just 2 of 6 games this season. We needed a DK Metcalf injury last week to open the door kind of for JSN. And if he doesn't even score that touchdown, and I don't want to be the guy that says pull this away from a guy and he didn't do something, but like, he had 4 catches for 63 yards. It's not like the dude went like absolutely nuclear last week against the Cardinals either. So it's just a really tough spot to say, like, against this Browns defense, like that we know it's going to play a ton of man coverage and give you opportunities for big plays. That's the first week we had seen them, right? Yeah. But when you play a lot of man coverage, that's why teams stop doing this in the NFL. Is you give up the one play touchdown drives, and the Browns gave up 2 of them last week. Yeah, and this is why we started to see the meta shift to the too high, because they want to beat us in 8 plays, beat us in 12 plays. By all means, do that. But you ain't gonna beat us in 1 play, and the Browns are one of those defense that invites it. So, like, is it a game? Do we see like a DK game, like an old school DK game, a Tyler Lockett opportunity game? The opportunity exists, but we need the Seahawks to open this shit up. And like, is BJ Walker going to be the quarterback to like push the game script again?
Probably not. We also have some injury uncertainty with that spot. That's why I thought it was so interesting. Kenneth Walker did not practice on Thursday with a calf injury. We also had Tyler Lockett, who missed practice on Thursday with his hamstring injury. DK Metcalf is full go out with his rib and hip injuries. So there's a lot of moving pieces still with these Seahawks team. And yeah, I was heavily invested in Geno as well. So I'm kind of waiting for that touchdown regression to come here. Still waiting. All right,
we'll say 49ers. 49ers Bengals we didn't talk about a lot. That's like the late spot game. We don't know if we're going to get Darnold, but obviously like Darnold's super cheap. You run a lot of different stacks. I'm very partial to this game because the biggest DFS week I've ever had in my life was 2 years ago when these teams played. So I feel obligated to try to get back to it because we've seen it again with Kittle, right? Like when one of these guys misses, Kittle's involved in the game offense. Mm-hmm. And like Kittle is a guy that generally gets overlooked because if people pay up for tight end, it's always typically for Kelsey, and then you just pay down. That's like typically how every gamer plays tight end on a given slate is pay up for Kelsey or pay down. So you'll see a lot of Kelsey, and Andrews gets mixed in because either he's priced the Lamar stacking stuff, but Kittle definitely is a guy that offers immense upside. Like if Debo's not going to play, and it sounds like he's not. So
yeah. And this was an interesting component of this last game before we get out of here. When they played Minnesota, I was off of Kittle in the showdown because of Brian Flores' increased blitz rates. Also, we had offensive line injuries with Trent Williams, who was out in that matchup. So I expected Kittle to be in to block more. When you talk about now a matchup against Lua and Arumo's zone-heavy defense that doesn't blitz a whole heck of a lot, it could open up Kittle to be in a route at a higher rate than he was last week. So I like that shout a good bit. Any other by the ways with before we get out of here, man?
No, I mean, I think this is a super fun slate. I think ownership's going to be relatively flat outside of Breece Hall on both sites, Kamara on DraftKings. Yeah, I think it's going to offer a pathway to a lot of just unique lineups and a lot of fun this weekend.
Oh, the way that Chalk's been hitting on DraftKings at running back, I'm just going to play Breece Hall and Alvin Kamara on every roster and just move on.
I mean, the DraftKings.
I'm kidding.
I don't want to throw DraftKings under the bus though. But their pricing has been so bad this year.
It's been really bad. 3 years ago, they were the tight pricing site, and now it's like, what's going on? Man, it's so loose. I don't know. We digress. Yeah. As always, Rich, it was a distinct pleasure jamming with you about Week 8. If you're new here, we're doing this every single week, searching for Ceiling at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, presented by One Week Season. Go check out One Week Season. Check out our new props package. Check out the Inner Circle, where you get a little bit more exposure to some heavier game theoretic methodologies. Go over to Sharp Football Analysis. Check out their awesome suite of analytics. And there's a code down in the description for 40% off. So check that out as well. Rich, until next time, man, it was a pleasure. We'll see y'all.
1 Week Season.